Hello, my name is Captain Andrea Cameron, and welcome to this virtual event about critical minerals and national security. I'm excited to bring DoD leaders in this topic to our broad audience today to discuss how critical minerals are essential to joint warfighting and their importance within the Department of Defense. Now, first, let me direct you to the events page where you can download our conference program for the event. The link is in the chat. The conference program has the agenda and full biographies of all the speakers. We have a lot of great content packed into our event today, so I'll be brief in introducing each of our speakers so that they have the maximum amount of time sharing their expertise. Now, this is our 6th conference focused on non-traditional and transnational issues organized by the Climate and Human Security Studies Group at the Naval War College. These conferences have explored risk and resilience in the 21st century, human security in the maritime environment, and hybrid warfare and climate change. We've worked with the geographic combatant commands to share how they've integrated environmental security issues into planning and operations. And we've taken a deep dive into the Navy and how they're engaging with allies and partners around the world. For those who've attended my events before, you know that I like taking the opportunity at the Naval War College to raise awareness about progress being made within the Department of Defense, highlight gaps and needs, or in my favorite types of topics, advancing a dialogue for conversations about future warfare concepts or requirements that I think we can propel forward to the next level. When I kept learning about the immense need for critical minerals to support the Department of Defense mission, I thought this was a great chance to bring attention to the subject. The topic has generated a lot of buzz, and I'm very excited today. We'll start this conversation, and I imagine it will only grow as we have everyone from strategists to warfighters to logisticians looking at how critical minerals are essential to the Department of Defense. To set the stage today, I'll give a little background on how we got here, and I'll start in 2017, when President Trump issued Executive Order 13817. This drove a document, a federal strategy to ensure secure and reliable supplies of critical minerals. This was followed in 2020 with Executive Order 13953 on addressing the threat to domestic supply chain from reliance on critical minerals from foreign adversaries and supporting the domestic mining and processing industries. Now, President Biden expanded on this further with Executive Order 14017 on America's supply chains in 2021. Now, that executive order specifically tasked the Secretary of Defense to identify risks in the supply chain for critical minerals and make policy recommendations to mitigate those risks. So in 2022, the DoD delivered the policy, Securing Defense Critical Supply Chains. The links to all of those documents can be found in my introductory letter in the conference program. And again, the conference program can be found at the bottom of the events page, and the link is in the chat. Now, in addition to this executive direction, the 2022 National Defense Strategy identified adapting and fortifying the defense ecosystem, and that includes the defense industrial base and global supply chains as well. Now, this in turn strengthens resilience and adaptability of the force. Building on this, in 2023, the Department of Defense released the first ever National Defense Industrial Strategy. That offered a strategic vision to coordinate and prioritize actions to build a modernized defense industrial ecosystem that is fully aligned with strategic guidance. Even more importantly, and recently released, the National Defense Industrial Strategy Implementation Plan for 2025. And that highlights 6 initiatives. Some of those are production and supply chains, allied and partner industrial collaboration, and capabilities and infrastructure modernization. All of these are in directly support of our #1 initiative, which is Indo-Pacific deterrence. The links to the Defense Industrial Strategy and the implementation plan for 2025 are also both in the chat. The combination of obtaining the necessary critical minerals required for DoD capabilities and the support from the defense industrial base to do this mission has led to rapid developments with the aim to improve shortfalls and vulnerabilities. And we examine this issue within the context of competition with China, where many of the minerals are mined and the majority of them are processed. So for this event, we'll examine the role critical minerals play in the Department of Defense, and we'll talk about what we need these minerals for, where do they come from and how do we use them, and how we can work with allies and partners to achieve mutual improved resilience for our advanced capabilities. I am truly honored to bring this focused event to our broad audience today. Before we begin, I'd like to thank my conference sponsor, Professor Peter Dombrowski, the William B. Ruger Chair of National Security Economics, as well as the Naval War College Foundation for sponsoring this conference. It's through their generosity that today's event is made possible. Now, to kick us off, I'd like to introduce our own Naval War College President, Rear Admiral Darryl Walker, to welcome us. Good morning, sir, and we look forward to your introductory remarks today.
Hey, good morning, Captain Cameron, Andrea. I really appreciate it. You freaking laid the foundation for this conference pretty well there, so I really appreciate you starting off there. Good morning to everybody and welcome. It's good to see a lot of folks online. I think we're at about 147 or 150, and then we should be somewhere in the neighborhood of about 230 to 240 people as people get online. Truly honored and excited to kick off the Critical Minerals and National Security Conference that Andrea kind of already really, again, set the foundation as I was listening to her remarks of, hey, I think of it about a symbiotic relationship between, the defense industrial base, getting those critical minerals and stuff for the war fighters, and the Department of Defense. So really, it'd be really excited about it. I know Ms. Carla Zeppieri, I apologize if I butchered her last name. Our keynote address was supposed to be here today, but I think she came down ill, and then we had the tag team in. So Adam Burstein from OSD-ANS, career civilian member, is going to cover down for her today. So excited to hear his remarks. He may have to pitch out because I think he has to go to the White House sometime today, or this morning. So really appreciate Adam being a part of the panels, obviously, and then being the keynote. I think we may have some active duty flags or retired flags that may be on this discussion. Arsenal Distinguished Fellows. Andrea already talked about the foundation. A lot of these conferences and symposiums that we do really can't happen without the support that our foundation, kind of hand in glove with the Naval War College. Our connected alumni that might be online here again, as the number grows up to about 155. Our academia partners there, and our faculty, and most important, the students. That's the final product that will be the future leaders for the Navy and for the Joint Force. So I'd like, again, she's already mentioned Professor Peter Dombrowski. Again, appreciate him sponsoring this conference. To the AV team, and then also our public affairs team. And it looks like we might even have some outside news agencies online. So that's actually really critical that those agencies are there. And then again to Andrea, she is committed to this important work here at the Naval War College. And a success for this conference. She's always in the frontline starters when we have conferences here. So Andrea, I really appreciate you taking charge and leading this. So as she kind of already said, hey, welcome to the Critical Minerals and National Security Online Conference. Again, hosted online here. And this is a part of the Naval War College's outreach and impact on non-traditional security issues. And again, I said the numbers are kind of jumping up there, so we're about 170. This conference brings together the Department of Defense experts for discussion on how to supply, storage, and stockpile those critical minerals that she had talked about to support the Department of Defense missions. So I'm excited to hear what the panels have to say in the keynote. Really here to kick off this important conference because the dedication and work of the faculty members here at the Naval War College Climate and Human Security Studies Group and the students for the climate change and national security electives have been doing to better understand climate concerns and the impacts to our national security. That's why our role at the Naval War College is to inform today's decision makers and educate tomorrow's leaders, which are a lot of those tomorrow's leaders here on the line. In today's dynamic security environment, numerical and technological superiority are no longer enough for us, as we have seen. We need to outthink our adversaries, and she kind of talked a little bit about that, how we can kind of do that. So at the Naval War College, we expand the intellectual capacity of our Navy, joint and interagency, and most importantly, our international leaders that come here and attend to achieve that cognitive advantage against our adversaries. Our objective here in Newport and around the globe is to deliver excellence in education, research, and outreach, and build an enduring relationship with our alumni and partners. The Naval War College is committed not only to conducting research, simulation, academic courses in the field of changing climate, but when appropriate, we also want to be leaders of leading voice for the Department of Defense among the international militaries and working to improve our abilities to better understand those changes. The power is, if we bring ourselves along, we lead the charge, we can also bring our partners. We produce graduates who can outthink critically and creatively and apply military power to fight and win when called upon. So at the Naval War College, climate security is a small slice of what we instruct here, but also an important study that educates, deeply researches, and conducts outreach all over the globe. Our professional military education prioritizes ethics in our study. Therefore, the Naval War College sees value in climate and human security study groups and our electives to be a great demand in the Changing Climate Conference, which invites you, top scholars in the field, those here on the line today. So as I've stated, we have a great lineup. I'm excited about the keynote speakers and about the panelists. My charge to you and my ask of you all is to really, when you go through this conference today, have an open mind, think outside of your area of specialty, listen, think critically, think about these important topics, and then most importantly, provide feedback on how we can drive change and make a difference, not only for the Department of Defense, but no kidding, for our globe and our partners. These issues are going to be critical. These issues are what are being discussed at every global combatant commander, and it is the #1 priority of how they fight and win when called upon. So again, Andrea and the team and the men and women that are online today, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time, and let's have a very productive and successful discussion today here. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Admiral Walker for his opening address today. Before launching into our keynote discussion, I'll briefly describe the overall event. First, we were expecting Miss Carla Zeppieri to provide our opening address, but she fell ill at the last moment. So filling in for her is working for her, Adam Burstein, and he was also one of our experts. I'm very happy to actually hear more from Adam, because from his own leadership and from everyone across the Pentagon, when I said I want to host an event on critical minerals, he was the one and only person they kept directing me to. So I'm very confident that he will represent his boss very well. And he's also going to be our first panelist when we go into our panel discussion. So we'll have our keynote, and then we will have the panel with Adam Burstein, Teresa Leland, and Greg Pollock. Now, after each of the panelists provide their remarks, we'll use the rest of the time for questions for our panelists. I'll moderate the questions, so we ask that you put them in the Q&A function and upvote questions of your interest, and we'll conclude today's event by 11:30 Eastern Time. For those who are interested, the event is also being recorded and will be available on the Naval War College YouTube page after we have concluded the event today. Now I'll go straight into our keynote address on critical minerals and national security. As I mentioned, we have leading this discussion today, representing Ms. Carla Zeppieri, Adam Burstein. And he's the Technical Director of Strategic and Critical Minerals. And he works specifically in the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Industrial-Based Policy, and that falls under our Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. Now, what does this office, specifically industrial-based resilience at the DoD, do? So I'll give you a scope of some of the responsibilities that fall under Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Zeppieri. Industrial-based resilience includes assessing the health of the defense industrial base and recommending key policies, investments, and actions designed to strengthen the capacity and resilience of the defense industrial base. She oversees the Policy Analysis and Transition Organization, which evaluates the critical defense industrial base sectors to meet warfighter needs, identifies emerging risks, and informs key policy, program, and budget decisions. This office also oversees the Manufacturing Capability Expansion and Investment Prioritization Office. That MCEIP office addresses identified supply chain and industrial-based risks through investments and prioritization authorizations exercised under the Defense Production Act and the Industrial Base Analysis and Sustainment Program. This is a really large portfolio, which makes a representative from industrial-based resilience a really perfect fit for kicking off our critical minerals in national security discussion today. So without further ado, I'd like to recognize, filling in for Ed.D. Zeppieri, Adam Burstein. Adam, thank you for joining us. You're going to do double duty today, both representing your boss as the keynote speaker and then immediately followed within the panel. We welcome you. Thank you for doing the double duty, and thank you on behalf of all of us for delivering Ed.D.'s remarks. Over to you.
Well, good morning, and thank you very much. Rear Admiral Walker for your remarks, and Captain Cameron, of course, for the invitation to address this distinguished group. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Industrial Base Resilience, Carla Zeppieri, my boss, sends her regrets, but I'm honored to be here and look forward to sharing more about how the Office of Industrial Base Policy, IBP, is taking action and shaping policy to build enduring advantages, particularly in the strategic and critical minerals sector. We know critical materials are used in microelectronics, aerospace, and so many other critical defense-related sectors. As we seek to reduce our risk and reliance on foreign sources, we are making strategic investments that support increasing domestic production and bolstering our country's stockpiles. The COVID pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine shed light on fragile supply chains and the reality that business as usual would not suffice to ensure the health and resiliency of the industrial base. While stability remains a key focus for the DoD, our office is looking to increase flexibility and agility within the department in both how we do business and how innovation, contracts, and production are conducted. This is evidenced by Executive Order 14017, America's Supply Chains, which was unveiled in February 2021, and the DoD's subsequent response titled Securing Defense Critical Supply Chains. These reports included recommendations to mitigate vulnerabilities and focused on 5 key areas: kinetic capabilities, energy storage and batteries, microelectronics, castings and forgings, and strategic and critical materials. More specifically, our office's response to the executive order was to deliver the first ever National Defense Industrial Strategy in January of 2024. The impact of the NDIS has reinvigorated a global conversation on the importance of the domestic defense industry, its role in the U.S. economy, and its central relationship to national security. The NDIS builds on the foundation of the National Defense Strategy, identifying opportunities to create industrial capability and capacity to meet the pacing threat. The NDIS provides a guiding vision and a roadmap for securing the industrial base through a combination of domestic production incentives, technology investments, and international partnerships, and details 4 strategic priorities resilient supply chains, workforce readiness, flexible acquisition, and economic deterrence. Additionally, we released the NDIS implementation plan in October, which translates the vision and objectives outlined in the NDIS into concrete actions and initiatives that are strengthening our defense industrial base. The implementation plan outlines 6 cross-cutting initiatives that represent the most urgent tasks that will deliver tangible results, reducing defense industrial base vulnerabilities and positioning us to counter future threats. I'd like to summarize the 6 implementation initiatives. First, building a defense industrial base framework to enhance integrated deterrence in the Indo-Pacific region. This initiative will focus on missiles and munitions, production, and the submarine industrial base as 2 requirements in the Indo-Pacific theater. Second, managing defense production and supply chains. Under this initiative, we will concentrate on onshoring defense critical capabilities and moving away from adversarial sources of supply. We will also conduct deeper analysis of supply chain vulnerabilities, enhance industrial cybersecurity, and reinvigorate critical materials stockpiling. Third, allied and partner industrial collaboration. This initiative further develops allied cooperation, emphasizing the AUKUS trilateral partnership and expanded interest in weapons systems co-production. We will leverage our respective strengths into a network of allied defense industrial base capability for mutual effectiveness and resilience. Fourth, capabilities and infrastructure modernization. Fostering a 21st century industrial base requires investment in infrastructure and fundamental industrial capability to meet strategic and key operational requirements. Modernizing the nuclear industrial base, the organic industrial base, and our maintenance, repair, and overhaul capacity will lay the groundwork for generating the systems we need. Fifth, utilizing more flexible pathways to field new capability. Crafting multiple DoD acquisition pathways for tailorable processes and rapid prototyping and fielding, we will continue to push adaptable acquisition to deliver cutting-edge technologies to the warfighter. Strengthening intellectual property and data analysis. Finally, our last initiative focuses on ensuring effective use of resources through a program lifecycle by fully integrating intellectual property planning into acquisition and product support strategies. Each initiative supports NDIS priorities to meet current demands and address future challenges, and much of this work is already underway. Continued success will require commitment, collaboration, and cooperation between the entire U.S. government, private industry, and our international allies and partners. As we prepare for the future of warfare, the DoD must leverage all available tools. For example, Industrial Base Policy oversees Defense Production Act, Title I, and Title III execution, 2 pivotal authorities for the defense industrial base. The purpose of DPA Title I is to ensure the timely availability of industrial resources to meet national defense and emergency preparedness requirements through the Defense Priorities and Allocations System, or DPAS. The DPAS can be used to rate orders to prioritize defense applications over others. DPA Title III is an investment authority committed to ensuring resilient, robust domestic supply chains in order to reduce reliance on foreign manufacturing and correct domestic shortfalls in the defense industrial base. Last year, through these programs, we invested more than $1 billion in critical minerals and materials, castings and forgings, and microelectronic supply chains. Of particular importance to the defense industrial base and supply chains is secure access to strategic and critical materials, the focus of today's discussion. The department needs secure, stable access to a range of strategic and critical minerals for everything from large capacity batteries and microelectronics to conventional munitions and missiles, and new materials for next generation weapons and aircraft. Battery materials such as lithium, cobalt, manganese, graphite, and nickel are necessary for the large capacity batteries that power DoD vehicles and ships. Missiles and munitions also rely on strategic materials such as antimony, magnesium, and other chemical precursors. Specialty metals such as titanium, tungsten, and high-purity aluminum are essential to manufacturing turbine engine parts, aircraft structures, unmanned aerial vehicles, vehicle armor, and much more. Finally, rare earth elements are vital to a range of defense systems and electronics. Rare earth permanent magnets are needed to power UAVs, Virginia and Columbia-class submarines, and DoD aircraft such as the F-35. I could go on for a long time, but it is clear that strategic and critical materials are necessary for national defense. Unfortunately, we also find these same supply chains vulnerable to disruption, including by adversarial attempts to restrict supply. In recent months, Chinese export bans on key materials such as gallium, germanium, and antimony have demonstrated China's willingness to cause such a disruption to critical U.S. supply chains and highlight the urgency of securing our supply chains against such tactics. Our reliance on foreign sources for critical minerals and rare earth materials is a national security risk. Industrial-based policies focus on domestic mining and processing aligns with broader DoD objectives to secure critical supply chains. Diversification is not just about increasing supply, but ensuring operational independence during high-stakes military campaigns. For example, since 2020, DoD has awarded more than $439 million to establish domestic rare earth element supply chains. This includes separating and refining rare earth elements mined in the United States, as well as developing downstream stateside processes needed to convert those refined materials into metals and then magnets. There are 17 elements on the periodic table referred to as rare earth. While DoD needs nearly all of them in some capacity, 3 are used to make the permanent magnets critical to so many defense systems. To address this critical need, my organization has embarked on a 5-year rare earth investment strategy to build mine-to-magnet domestic capacity. This investment strategy will encompass sourcing, separation, processing, metallization, alloying, and magnet manufacturing. The sourcing of rare earth elements means mining rare earth elements out of the ground, and there is only one rare earth mine currently active and selling to the commercial market from the United States. We are taking steps to address this shortfall. For example, our office issued multiple awards totaling $285.7 million in areas such as domestic mining and production of lithium, including $11.8 million to Lithium Nevada Corporation, to expand the graphite and critical chemical supply. This is just the beginning. We are committed to continuing to invest in secure supply chains for minerals and materials that are critical to our defense and commercial sectors. Partnering with allies is also key to the success of this strategy. Earlier this year, the U.S. Congress added the United Kingdom and Australia as domestic sources, in addition to Canada, for purposes of the Defense Production Act. This means we can now make direct investments in our closest partners and reflects the enduring commitment of the U.S. government to partner with key allies over the long term. Last year, we issued multiple DPA awards to projects based in Canada, which also received joint funding from the Canadian government. These projects are targeted to increase the secure supply of key materials, including cobalt, graphite, and tungsten. For example, we issued a $6.4 million DPA award to Fortune, along with a $5.6 million award from the Canadian government to support cobalt sulfate and bismuth metal production capabilities, and an $8.3 million award to Lamico, along with $3.6 million in Canadian funding to advance a natural flake graphite project. And finally, a $15.8 million award to Canadian company Fireweed Metals, along with $9.2 million from Canada's Department of Natural Resources to accelerate the development of a tungsten mine in the Yukon, which is one of the world's largest undeveloped high-grade deposits of tungsten. We also made several awards to Australian-based companies operating in the United States. For example, we awarded Australia-based Lynas USA a combined $288 million in funding to establish a second domestic commercial-scale oxide production capability by 2026. And this is in addition to a 2021 DPA grant worth $30.4 million for Lynas Rare Earths to build a processing facility in Texas. Upon completion of this project, Lynas will produce approximately 25% of the world's supply of rare earth element oxides. By partnering with our close allies, we can capitalize on opportunities to leverage each other's strengths to mutually reinforce our domestic and allied defense industrial bases. This includes 19 security of supply arrangements that the U.S. has with partner nations, which allow DoD to request priority delivery for DoD contracts, subcontracts, or orders from companies in those countries, and allow the signatory nations to request the same of the United States. These agreements further demonstrate DoD's commitment to strengthening and expanding existing alliances and forging new partnerships that increase capabilities and strengthen the defense industrial base. Stockpiling is another core element of DoD's vision for creating more resilient supply chains, specifically for strategic and critical minerals. These excess inventories reduce our risk from unanticipated demand spikes or supply chain disruptions, essentially acting as shock absorbers for the supply chain. We are focusing on embracing an expanded approach to stockpile and inventory planning. For example, we are taking a wide range of considerations from demand forecasting, risk assessments to supply chain coordination, and budgeting and funding. In support of the National Defense Stockpile, we know the target stock levels for strategic and critical materials will depend on mineral extraction, recycling, and materials science infrastructure and supply base. Finally, I'm pleased to share that just earlier this week, we announced the formal establishment of the Strategic and Critical Materials Board of Directors. Developed under the authority of the Stockpiling Act and the Federal Advisory Committee Act, the board will be a non-discretionary federal advisory committee and will advise the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment and the Secretary of Defense on a strategy for securing DoD's supply chains for strategic and critical materials and strengthening the national defense stockpile. Chaired by the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Industrial Base Policy, we will be working together with leading experts across industry and with members of the DoD, Department of Energy, State, Commerce, and the Interior, and the Armed Services Committees of the House and Senate to identify innovative solutions for complex industrial-based challenges and ensure secure and resilient access to the materials and minerals that we need. We look forward to the first Board of Directors meeting later this year. In closing, I want to reiterate the importance of bolstering our defense industrial base, including the critical minerals that underpin it. Recent disruptions and adversarial actions have underscored what we have long recognized, that it is more urgent than ever to build capability and resilience in the supply chains for critical minerals and other key sectors. To do so, the DoD must address multifaceted challenges, including capacity in defense mineral supply chains, adversarial capital in global minerals production, insufficient labor and training, concerns about ethical and sustainable sources of supply, and economic headwinds that disadvantage domestic and allied mineral production. Challenges like these are what the DoD needs you to think through. Clearly, this is a pretty big ask, and no one expects an immediate solution. As the next batch of senior leaders in the DoD, we welcome your ideas about how we can improve our industrial base resilience and secure the critical minerals needed for our national defense and economic security. To this end, I'd like to leave you with a few questions for your consideration. How do we innovate and think forward about the defense industrial base and the minerals that underpin it at the tactical, operational, and strategic levels? How does the department get private industry to act in a capitalist economic system? What are the limits to what the government can or should do to intervene in global markets as complex and critical materials? I want to thank you again for the opportunity to speak today. Truly an honor, and I look forward to hearing today's panel discussion. Thank you.
I'd like to express my deep thanks to Adam Burstein for sharing the remarks on behalf of DASD Zeppieri today and leading us into the key themes of the conference. I think you hit all of the things in the keynote, which makes it a perfect keynote about kind of how we use these. Why are they needed operationally? What are some of the logistical challenges of getting these materials, processing these materials, issues with stockpiling and supply chain, and then the importance of how we work with our allies and partners because we share so many capabilities with them. You discussed over $1 billion just this last year on strategic and critical minerals being used for everything from armor to unmanned systems. And for those interested, I did put in the chat recent updates like the mine to magnet supply chain for rare earth materials and the newly announced Strategic and Critical Minerals Board of Directors, which is hot off the press just this week. So congratulations for all of the incredible work that is happening in industrial-based policy. And it was a perfect framing for the rest of our discussion today. So as a reminder, all conference materials can be downloaded at the bottom of the Naval War College events page for this event. And please refer to the conference program for the agenda and full biographies of all of our speakers. As a reminder, this event is being recorded and will be available on the Naval War College YouTube page after the event. You can start loading questions in the Q&A feature, and we look forward to fielding some of those questions. I will moderate and select some after all of the panelists have spoken today. So without further ado, we're going to have a full panel going a little bit deeper into the relationship of critical minerals and national security. And as I mentioned, Adam, who has just filled in for the DASD, is now also our first panelist. So I imagine he'll take some of that large framing that was presented in our keynote and bring it down to what he does every day as the technical director for strategic and critical minerals in the industrial-based policy, specifically industrial-based resilience office. So Adam, I'd like to turn it back over to you to hear more about what you're doing in your current job and a little bit more details as you take it to the kind of next level of depth for us. Thank you again.
Thank you. So a little bit of context to frame the rest of the discussion. We encounter much misunderstanding regarding what is referred to when we talk about critical minerals. So first, I would like to point out that we are usually not referring to minerals at all, but rather to the elemental metals and substances derived from those minerals. Additionally, instead of including all minerals required for national security, the Department of Defense narrows the definition of strategic and critical materials to those needed to supply the military, industrial, and essential civilian needs of the United States during a national emergency, and which are not found or produced in the United States in sufficient quantities to meet that need. The definition then is not limited in scope to importance, but also to supply chain risk. From my experience as a student in the College of Naval Warfare, I know that this audience, more than most, understands that national security and economic security are inextricably linked. Critical materials underpin all aspects of both a thriving economy and a strong national defense. Of course, these materials are found in nearly every modern electronic device and enable defense systems of the U.S. Armed Forces and those of our allies and partners. I'd like to point out that the phone in your pocket right now contains about 60 metals and materials, most of which are characterized as critical. And the supply chains for many of these are concentrated in just a handful of countries, primarily China. As an example, China controls over 90% of rare earth element production, 100% for some of the most important, and just as troubling, they control 100% of the production of many high purity materials and much of the technical know-how for that production. I don't think we should begrudge China for this. They have made good use of their talents in a largely free market-based globalized economy, but to rely on single sources or single nation producers at all is asking for trouble. We know from history that industrialized nations that do not have secure and reliable access to critical materials in wartime have suffered performance trade-offs that contributed to their defeat on the battlefield. And we know that restricted access to such materials can lead to war. Look no further than Thucydides' casus belli, fear, honor, and interest for proof, or to the US-Japanese tit for tat on rubber and oil that led in great part to Pearl Harbor and the war in the Pacific. Critical minerals support high-wage jobs in the mining and chemical processing industries, as well as the production of value-added goods in sectors critical to a clean energy transition like electric vehicles. In general, defense demand for these minerals represents a very small fraction of global demand, and we are largely reliant on industries, especially those foundational to the clean energy transition, for the marketplace that makes critical mineral supply chains economically viable. By virtue of geography and geology, critical mineral supply chains are global and interconnected. Supply disruptions in recent months, such as those I just mentioned regarding antimony, gallium, germanium, and graphite, highlight the need to ensure that the global sources for the minerals we need are both secure and sustainable. DoD cannot and does not do this alone. These supply chains are not just critical to defense, but to a range of federal agencies, industries, and numerous other important stakeholders in the sector. For this reason, the new Strategic and Critical Materials Board of Directors, directed in statute and established last month, is designed to convene stakeholders with a broad range of perspectives and experience needed to address the aforementioned challenges. Members will be appointed and confirmed to the board early this year, with representatives from across the critical minerals and defense industries, as well as members designated by Congress and the Secretaries of Energy, State, Commerce, and the Interior. The S&CM Board of Directors will advise the department on a strategy to secure the supply of defense critical materials, including leveraging all available tools to increase our resilience. The DoD's approach to securing strategic and critical materials supply chains centers on 4 key pillars, guided by the National Defense Industrial Strategy. These are stockpiling, investment, policy, and international partnerships. Ms. Terry Leland will talk to us more about the National Defense Stockpile, or NDS, in a moment, but I want to highlight stockpiling as a key pillar of the department's approach. We see a robust stockpile as key to mitigating U.S. vulnerability to sudden supply disruptions by serving as a buffer during emergencies. The reserves in the stockpile allow us to release materials to keep key production lines operating until long-term supply lines can be restored. The strong stockpile can also deter adversaries who may otherwise consider trying to disrupt supply. If our adversaries know that their efforts will only have limited effect, they're less likely to antagonize us through their efforts. And a stockpile that is coordinated with stakeholders across the U.S. government can maximize the impact of U.S. policy efforts to build resilient supply chains by sending the strong demand signals to secure suppliers that help bring down risk that is off-putting to potential investors. The stockpile has undergone changes in recent decades. The post-Cold War peace dividend led to a multi-decade reduction in stockpile inventory as a bill payer for other initiatives and federal debt. But U.S. leaders on both sides of the aisle now recognize that today's threat environment is very different from that of the post-Cold War era, and it's more urgent than ever to bolster the stockpile to respond to coercive behaviors and that threaten our own defense. The S&CM Board of Directors will play a key role in the revitalization of the NDS. The board will enhance NDS effectiveness by advising on opportunities to streamline acquisition, implement commercial leading best practices, and further operationalize new authorities. In addition to stockpiling to mitigate sudden disruptions, the DoD is also making important strides in establishing long-term resilience by investing in domestic capabilities and production of the minerals we need. As I highlighted earlier, the department has used key authorities such as the Defense Production Act, Title III, and the Industrial Base Analysis and Sustainment Program to invest in private sector projects to build domestic production capacity for a wide range of critical minerals necessary for defense and critical civilian applications. As of November 16th, 2023, DoD has awarded or committed over $1 billion across more than 30 strategic and critical materials projects since FY22. DoD has invested in capabilities to mine and process rare earth elements, minerals needed for semiconductors, battery minerals, as well as specialty metals that enable the advanced capabilities of DoD systems in the warfighter. All suppliers that help bring down risk. More investments are planned to meet U.S. and defense needs for critical materials. Over the long term, these investments are laying the foundation for a more secure defense industrial base, bringing production of key minerals back to the U.S. at every stage in the supply chain. Our investments and stockpiling actions are coordinated with DoD acquisition requirements that restrict the sourcing of strategic and critical materials incorporated into DoD end products, from aircraft to weapons systems. Acquisition sourcing restrictions route defense supply chains and secure suppliers and direct the DoD's demand signal to support domestic and allied sources. One notable change was mandated in law. DoD suppliers will soon be required to source certain metals and rare earth permanent magnets from a supply chain entirely decoupled from China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. This mine-to-metal or mine-to-magnet policy shift, effective in 2027, is a significant change and will require more secure sourcing, beginning at the mine tier of the mineral supply chain. Rooting DoD supply chains and secure sources is imperative to national security, and we recognize the challenges inherent to securing the rare earth mine-to-magnet supply chain. To meet these challenges, the DoD is coordinating all available tools, including policy, investment, and continuous industry engagement to succeed with this national security imperative. While bolstering domestic capacity is paramount, we also recognize that critical mineral supply chains are truly global, with many nations playing unique and strategic roles across these complex and diverse supply chains. In addition to bolstering stockpiles and investing in domestic production, we must engage our allies and partners to diversify global critical material supply chains and remove dangerous bottlenecks endangering secure access. Partner nations with strong mining sectors, such as Canada and Australia, are poised to play critical roles as secure and sustainable global sources of these materials. The recent expansion of the Defence Production Act to include the UK and Australia as domestic sources, in addition to Canada, is a critical opportunity to strengthen military partnerships such as AUKUS and to invest in and leverage the unique capabilities of our allies. The department has already taken action by investing in mineral projects in Canada announced last year, which were supported with joint funding from the Canadian government. Beyond investment, the department has entered into agreements with partners that allow the U.S. and our allies to leverage our strengths to mutually bolster defense supply chains in case of disruption. The security of supply arrangements that I mentioned earlier are one example of this. SOSAs, as they're called, are bilateral, reciprocal, non-binding arrangements, which outline a formal process for the department, foreign counterparts, or industry partners to request or provide priorities support for industrial resources that are required for national defense purposes. These four key pillars, international partnerships, recapitalizing and empowering the national defense stockpile, investing in our domestic industries, and policies, rooting DoD supply chains and secure sources, are the key tools in the department's approach to securing strategic and critical material supply chains. And we will continue working with the interagency to align our unique authorities to maximum effect. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to our other panelists.
Thank you so much to Adam Burstein for this more in-depth talk on critical minerals. And now I have to reevaluate my definitions based on your incredible talk that you gave. As I said earlier, anytime I spoke with a colleague about this upcoming conference idea, they all said we had to talk to you. And now everyone in the audience also knows why you are the expert when it comes to strategic and critical minerals. You can see why we are so proud of our alumni from the Naval War College, and I appreciate you giving some of your comments, noting what they were particularly learning about and interested in. Now, as a reminder to everyone participating today, the Q&A function is open already. I also invite our speakers, while you're not speaking, to perhaps go in and answer some of the questions, because we probably won't get to all of them at the end of the event. Our next speaker today is Ms. Teresa Leland, Deputy Administrator of the Defense Logistics Agency Strategic Minerals. As the Deputy Administrator, Ms. Leland serves as the Principal Advisor and Consultant to the Administrator, supporting general oversight, management, and control of all strategic minerals operations, including the inventory management, environment management, market analysis, and sales, supply chains assessments, requirements determination, critical material acquisitions, audit, development of legislation, and congressional reporting. So it's a very large function, right in what we're talking about for today's event. These activities are in support of the DoD National Defense Stockpile, NDS, a program charged with the mission of reducing U.S. dependence on foreign sources of strategic and critical minerals during times of national emergency. So we're honored to bring Ms. Teresa Leland to us today. She has a master's degree in environmental science from Johns Hopkins University and a bachelor's in biology from Villanova University. And she has over 20 years of federal experience. Thank you so much to Ms. Terry Leland, who will be speaking with us today, and I will give you an opportunity to pull up your presentation. We look forward to learning more about the National Defense Stockpile.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Rear Admiral Walker for his remarks, and the Naval War College and Captain Cameron, of course, for you inviting me to speak today. I'm the Deputy Administrator for the National Defense Stockpile. I brought PowerPoint slides today just to keep me on track. And my presentation or my discussion will be a little bit different from Adam's. I'm going to be speaking specifically to the National Defense Stockpile. Some people have heard of us, but many people haven't really heard about the details of what we do. So I'll be speaking to that, what we do, how we do it. We are an operational unit. I work for the Defense Logistics Agency, DLA. My small organization, Strategic Materials, we handle all the operation and the day-to-day management of the National Defense Stockpile. So I do look at things from an operational perspective, as opposed to a wider policy view. So I wanted to just start with the act that brought us into creation. We were started by an act of Congress in 1939, the Strategic and Critical Materials Stockpiling Act. I just mentioned the 1939 because it sort of gives a clue that this is not a new situation for our nation. It's something that's been a cyclical concern for many decades. And we've gone through many iterations since we were formed in 1939. I would say that most recently, about 15 years ago, there was renewed concern or interest regarding the fact that our nation, not just our civilian economy, but our defense platforms are dependent on strategic and critical materials, which might be solely coming to us from foreign sources, who in a global conflict might be our adversary with us, or just make it difficult logistically to continue to access those sources. So our focus, our focus is on looking at how to reduce that risk of how to decrease a dangerous and costly dependence on foreign sources or single points of failure of strategic and critical materials, specifically during times of national emergency. So about 10 years ago, we started to reacquire material into the stockpile, and the material that's brought into the stockpile that is dependent on annual appropriations from Congress. So in order to try to mitigate and reduce this risk, there's a few activities that we engage in. The key activity is stockpiling, where we are acquiring, procuring materials, strategic and critical materials, and then putting them into retention and warehousing them. We also have a R&D program. It's a fairly small portion of what we do, but we do support research and development on materials to try to widen materials that could be used in defense platforms. We also have a program for qualifying new domestic sources of supply so that they can be used in DoD platforms. We have a recycling program. We do focus on a few specific materials. We do not, as a whole, handle DoD waste streams or end-of-life materials. However, we do work with our partners at DLA Disposition Services and the military services. And through that partnership, we've been able to identify a few key materials that are fairly accessible to remove from end-of-life products. So we do have a program for recovering germanium. We've recovered boron carbide armor plates, and also we had a program for super alloys. In addition to those programs, some of the less frequent activities that we engage in are that we can process and upgrade some of our older stocks of materials to prevent obsolescence. Some of our materials have been in the stockpile 75 years or longer. So we do have some older materials, and we do keep an eye on making sure that they continue to be maintained in the state that they could be slotted into the defense industrial base in the event of an emergency. And we also have a sales program for some of the obsolescent materials that we had stockpiled over the many decades. Most of those obsolescent materials have been sold off, but we still do have a small sales program. Okay, so hopefully I have advanced to the slide with showing a. I'm having a hard time because I can't see the slides. So let's see.
Stockpile release authorities. Thanks, Terry.
I'm sorry. I'm not sure why I can't see the slides on the screen there. So one of the key components for the National Defense Stockpile is that we are truly for a break glass moment because we have this foreign dependence on these materials. Legislation prohibits us from using stockpiles for budgetary or economic purposes. They are truly for a national emergency, because if they're used, if you draw upon your stockpiles, they're limited stockpiles, and if they're pulled out, once they're pulled out, they're gone. So they are meant to be in storage for that point where they're truly needed, because the country has been cut off from any other sources of materials. So historically, the material from the stockpile can be released on order of the president, in times of war by Congress, and more recently, there is a delegation to the Undersecretary of Defense for A&S to be able to release materials. So those are I mentioned that because we do get a lot of interest in the stockpiles, but it's not such a simple process to release materials. It really is for a true national emergency type situation. And I believe I am now on the slide discussing our strategic materials and quantifying shortfalls. So one question, of course, is how do we identify strategic and critical materials? How do we identify the dollar amount of the shortfall? And we go through a biennial economic modeling process. This is a rather involved process. It's a suite of economic models. We work with IDA on this. We have a partnership with IDA. And so it's a biennial process. We just drafted the 2025 report for Congress. The 2023 was the last report we did. And what we are looking at, and this is framed by the Strategic and Critical Materials Stockpiling Act, is we're looking at, in the event of a conflict, what is needed to replace or replenish those materials within a 3-year period. And that would be DoD platforms, defense needs, as well as essential civilian needs. So there's a lot that goes into that. It's looking at the essential demand for goods and services under national emergency conditions, determining the materials necessary to produce those goods and services, determining available supplies of materials under national emergency conditions, and comparing the available material supplies with material demands to determine gross material shortfalls. And then we also look at what the market response would be in the event of a national emergency. So we factor in some of the economic mitigation strategies that would occur in the event of a national emergency. And that we run this process to basically develop the list of strategic and critical materials that we should be focusing on, as well as what the shortfall, the dollar amount of those materials would be that this country would not have access to in an emergency. So I mentioned our 25 report is in draft. Our 23 report, I do have some information on that. So when we did the 2023 report, we identified 69 defense materials, shortfalls, and the value of those was $2.4 billion. And on the essential civilian side, we identified 35 materials, and the dollar amount for that was about $16 billion. And in the last 3 years, we've been working to fill shortfalls. We've 22, 23, and 24, we received appropriations for purchasing materials to add to the stockpile. And that is just shy of about $300 million the last 3 years. So when we look to add materials to the stockpile, we do follow the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulations. But so we've been instructed by Congress basically in the act to maximize competition and industrial engagement when we procure our materials. And we emphasize competition in commercially available materials. We also work closely with IBP and the other suite of tools that are being used across OSD to develop domestic capability so that what we do can help to support new and developing domestic capabilities. And when we look at these materials, for us, we do look at a wide range of supply chains under this net of strategic and critical materials. So we are looking at the mineral commodities, but we're also looking at some materials that are very defense specific. Those are the energetics. Those are of high concern currently, as well as high-tech materials. Those are the high priorities for the Department of Defense currently. And when we look at stockpiling, I would just sort of like to add that not every material is suitable to be stockpiled. So there is a lot of there's a lot of analysis that we do to determine what really is stockpile suitable and how to store it. So some of the considerations we look at are technological or industrial obsolescence. Clearly, we want to make sure that what we purchase can be used by the domestic industrial base in an emergency. So those are two key areas that we analyze as we're looking at making our purchases. We also look at the form that can be used by industry. So that's both the physical characteristics of the material as well as the chemistry of the material. That informs the decisions we make about what to purchase. And for any particular material, we will consider degradation issues and shelf longevity of the material. We also look at the suitability of other mitigation strategies. So Adam mentioned many other tools that are used across the department. And if there are opportunities to grow the domestic capability rather than stockpiling, that's always a great strategy. And we might look at materials that are less likely to be having more challenges with domestic capability. And when we look at stockpiling, we look at environmental safety issues. And we are currently prioritizing defense shortfalls, but both defense and essential civilian shortfalls are critical. And I mentioned our small sales program. Some of the materials that we've been selling in the last few years: beryllium metal, chrome metal, ferrochrome, ferromanganese, tin, and zinc. So that was just really just an introduction to the National Defense Stockpile and what we do. I look forward to some of the panel discussion that we'll be having.
I'd like to thank Ms. Terry Leland for the more in-depth explanation of the DoD National Defense Stockpile. I was particularly blown away about the 69 defense shortfalls valued at 2.4 billion and the 35 essential civilian shortfalls valued at 16 billion. And it was really interesting, your mention of a strategy to grow domestic capability instead of stockpiling, and how important congressional funding is for the DoD to keep meeting these needs of critical minerals. Thank you to Ms. Leland. I'm going to transition to our last speaker now, Mr. Greg Pollock. He's our final speaker. He's served for the past decade in a series of leadership positions at the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Policy, and he currently serves as the Principal Director for the new Arctic and Global Resilience Office. I know him because he was a Secretary of Defense chair on the faculty at the National War College from 2019 to 2022, where he taught courses in national security strategy, U.S.-China relations, and the implications of global climate change for national security. So, Mr. Pollock, welcome today. We look forward to hearing your perspective from the Arctic and Global Resilience Office.
Thank you, Captain Cameron, for that kind introduction and the opportunity to join this important conversation and share a perspective from the Arctic and Global Resilience Office, from the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Policy on critical mineral supply chains. It's obviously very beneficial to me, frankly, to hear the latest updates and perspectives from some of the other key DoD players on these issues, from the Industrial Base Resilience Office and the Defense Logistics Agency. It's these folks who are really kind of driving forward progress at the technical level, at the level of investing domestically in new mines and processing facilities. So I just want to thank them for their work. As you know, Captain Cameron, and probably many on this line, the Department of Defense is a very big place. So simply bringing us together to sync up on our work and share our narratives is a kind of service unto itself. As my colleagues have noted, critical minerals serve various functions for defense platforms and technologies. And as Adam noted, we could really go on all day sort of listing out the various ways in which critical minerals go into key platforms, whether it's drones, submarines, F-35s, et cetera. Antimony is used as a lead hardener for bullets. Gallium is used to power circuits for radars. Germanium goes into infrared search and track systems to help pilots detect and track enemy aircraft. So we could really just kind of go on and on about the ways in which these inputs go into so much of what we do. Of course, these things go into everything in the civilian economy as well. It's going to be critical to think about these issues in terms of the clean energy transition writ large. These minerals are much the guts of our iPhones, our computers, so much of what makes day-to-day life run nowadays. And so the Department of Energy, the Department of Commerce, a number of the other civilian departments and agencies have real critical roles to play when it comes to thinking about critical mineral supply and security of supply for domestic economic needs. But we nonetheless see a really important role for ministries of defense to play, given how important these inputs are, these critical minerals and rare earth elements are to the construction of DoD capabilities and operational platforms. This issue has, of course, become more high profile in recent years, and I think that's one of the reasons this is the topic of our discussion today. But it's, of course, not a new issue. When I came into the department about 15 years ago as a director for African Affairs, there was already awareness, for example, that Africa had a huge reserve of critical minerals and rare earths, and this was a place that we probably needed to be more focused when it came to thinking about the economies of the future. But as Adam alluded, the Chinese were frankly quicker to jump on this issue and use a range of policy tools to build advantage in both the extraction and the processing of critical minerals. I think the question before us now is, what's the scale of the risk that the United States, our allies and partners face with respect to China's potential use of its dominant position with respect to critical minerals and rare earth to coercive effect? And we already see them exploring how they might use export controls and reporting requirements and maybe even total bans. They've been experimenting with thinking about restricting antimony, gallium, germanium. How is this going to exacerbate existing risks? These developments highlight the need for the United States and DoD specifically as part of a whole of government approach to collaborate with our allies and partners to make sure that we're aligning on priorities in ensuring our collective access to strategic defense minerals. So we need to start by understanding risk and recognizing, on the one hand, as the National Security Advisor on down has warned, there's real potential here for China to use its stranglehold on critical minerals markets to its advantage, akin to what Russia tried to do with its cutting off of natural gas to Europe in response to sanctions, Western sanctions resulting from Moscow's further invasion of Ukraine. But at the same time, we need to remind ourselves that the sort of hydrocarbon analogy really isn't a perfect analogy in many ways. We don't need critical minerals on a day-to-day basis the way we need fossil fuels, and especially not the way we needed them back in the 1970s when OPEC would cut off supplies and there were very limited near-term substitutions for oil supply. And just to add kind of one additional layer, and I think Terry alluded to this, stockpiling of critical minerals is not akin to stockpiling oil. And this is not as straightforward as kind of replicating a strategic petroleum reserve for critical minerals as we did with oil following some of the actions that OPEC took in the 70s, 80s, and even in the 90s. We need critical minerals at so many different processing levels. And as Adam alluded, our requirements are all across the periodic table. So even if we did get to a point where we had access to critical mineral extraction, we'd still be highly reliant on processing that's still largely based in the PRC. So a big challenge for us to overcome, and we won't be able to do it unilaterally, which is fortunate that our office now exists to focus on these issues. The Office of Arctic and Global Resilience Policy, which, as I mentioned, drives progress and strategic cohesion on these matters at the level of the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Our day-to-day work is on working with allies and partners and ensuring cohesion across the department and in the interagency on exactly these kinds of matters. And I think we've made some real progress in this respect. And my participation today is really meant to underscore how central these issues of supply chains, energy security, and resilience are to OSD policies work moving forward. And I think that's only going to continue growing over time. Our team has been very busy over the last couple of years incorporating these issues into DoD strategic documents, our posture planning, our budgetary processes, and even the training and education of the next generation of military and civilian leaders. And, shout out to Team PME, as Andrea mentioned, my battle buddy on these issues and other issues. Really it's the professional military education institutions that really set the table for so much of the work that happens at the strategic level as folks at the kind of 05, 06 level move into the GOFO and senior executive ranks. But across all of our work streams, we want to make clear that, we understand that addressing energy and resilience concerns is imperative, not for the planet or maybe for some of the reasons that the Special Envoy for Climate might care about, but for maintaining military capability and building warfighter advantage. So I know we're growing a little bit short on time, but I'm just going to shout out 3 specific examples of where these issues have come up recently with allies and partners in ways that I think are really important and demonstrate the way in which we are building a kind of international kind of consortium approach to these issues. I think Adam mentioned some of the mining projects in Canada. So I was just recently in Ottawa to participate in the U.S.-Canada Permanent Joint Board on Defense, which is kind of the premier U.S.-Canada bilateral defense cooperation forum. And these issues were really front and center. With support from many of the folks on the line today, from DLA and from the industrial-based policy team, I was able to present the U.S. approach on these issues to date, highlight opportunities for further collaboration. And the Canadians really likewise stressed the need for us to make sure that we're linking up what's going on at the policy and strategy level with what's already happening at the kind of technical level and among acquisition communities. And I think we're building that connective tissue day in and day out here. And, my Canadian counterparts, I think, very helpfully noted that they intend to prioritize some of these critical mineral concerns as part of their G7 presidency in 2025. So I strongly hope that sticks. I'd also note that critical mineral supply chains have played a prominent role in our first 2 convenings of the International Climate and Energy Security Forum, what we, needing an acronym for everything around here, call somewhat clunkily the ICESF. So the ICESF is a first of its kind forum to coordinate with key defense allies on climate and energy security matters. We established it in 2023, and we held the first meeting out in California. Our Australian colleagues recently hosted the second iteration of this body in Canberra in November. And this format includes our Five Eye partners, France, Germany, the NATO international staff, as well as representatives from Japan and South Korea. So it's not all of the key players, but it's a good kind of core to build cooperation with. We've received strong demand signal from all the participants to ensure that critical minerals are front and center in these discussions. And it was a key topic here in our most recent meeting, as I said, in Canberra in November. Our Australian colleagues asked us to chair a session on critical minerals and batteries and their salience for defense platforms and operational resilience moving forward. So again, working very closely with our industrial-based colleagues, we led a session focused on our strategies, our policies, and our investments designed to alleviate risk in these areas. And we committed to creating more linkages between our acquisition communities, our technical experts, and our policy and strategy levels. As I think a clear metric of success, the other participants agreed in our meeting last month to start convening regular meetings at lower levels to ensure that there's ongoing work and linkages amongst our real subject matter experts on these topics, and that we can sort of build towards more higher level decision making and agreements in our next meeting of the International Climate and Energy Security Forum. And then finally, I'd note as a third example, the growing engagement we've had in Brussels at NATO headquarters on these matters. Our team, myself included, have spoken out at NATO a couple of times, at the North Atlantic Council level and at the political committee level in support of NATO's, I think, really path-breaking energy transition by design initiative. This was again affirmed at the NATO summit in Washington last summer. This is a key effort to support NATO military's transition to clean energy technologies and platforms, while again simultaneously enhancing allied military effectiveness. It's really, I think, incredibly important that we underscore that we are no longer buying into the idea that you can either be adopting clean energies or you can be lethal, agile, and resilient. In fact, by adopting next generation power generation and distribution technologies, we can be more lethal, more resilient, more agile, and more survivable, and also be more operationally efficient. So kind of double bottom line there. The technological innovations, of course, that will support these efforts will, in large part originate in the private sector. So we need to make sure that, working with folks like the Defense Innovation Unit and others, we're fast following what's happening in the private sector. Again, acknowledging that so many of these technologies are going to involve critical minerals. So understanding how the NATO alliance could work together in concert to secure critical mineral supply chains for our defense platforms and creating kind of coherent standards around these matters is really important. I could flag a whole number of other engagements where these issues have come up and where I feel like we're driving progress in our defense dialogues with allies and partners, whether in Europe, in Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, and of course, really importantly, the Indo-Pacific. But I think I'll leave it at those three examples for now, and maybe we can get into some others in the Q&A. I think suffice to say that as we look to 2025, it's going to be incredibly important to develop a bipartisan consensus around a strategic approach to these matters. I think that's already happening in meaningful degree. I might just kind of speculate here that the import of critical minerals to the economies and the military forces of the future may be in part what's behind the incoming administration's public interest of late in Greenland in particular, which is believed to have significant reserves of certain critical minerals. Again, I'm speculating on that, but something to bear in mind here moving forward. I'd also note that, in terms of next steps, I'd love for us to think further about how DoD can model how a circular economy might function, beginning with critical minerals, exploring how these inputs can be recycled from existing material. I'd note that I think Terry mentioned in brief that DLA actually already operates a program to recycle germanium from used military equipment, turning old night vision goggles and the turret windows from Bradley fighting vehicles into germanium ingots, pure germanium. This is maybe a footnote to history, but I can't help but speculate about the scale of recyclable critical materials we may have left behind when we withdrew from Afghanistan, leaving tons of materiel in place. But regardless, I think these programs really bear the potential to become increasingly important as demand is growing globally, and germanium consumption is actually exceeding production at this point. Until the PRC's germanium export ban in November of last year, I think we were importing about 53% of U.S. germanium from the PRC, and the U.S. Geologic Survey suggests that a total PRC ban on germanium would increase the price of it by about 26%. So this could make these kinds of recycling programs that much more economically competitive as well. It's a tough challenge, but certainly something I think that bears further attention. So, as I say, as we move into the new administration and think about our priorities for the Office of Arctic and Global Resilience in 2025, I think these matters are going to be front and center. I think everybody's underscored this is a hard, complex problem, but we have the advantage of having an immense network across our department, with our interagency partners, with our colleagues in the think tank community and the national labs, the FFRDCs, the PME institutions, as well as with our allies and partners around the world. So we'll look forward to continuing to really focusing on these challenges and driving progress, working together with a sense of common purpose. So I'll stop there. I thank you for the time and look forward to everyone's questions. Over.
Thank you so much to Mr. Pollock for your really kind of insightful comments from the policy engagement side, especially your global engagement. I'd like to invite all the speakers to go camera on for the question and answer period. And I have kind of pulled and generalized some of the questions just to give a little context. Didn't select questions about specific minerals. Some of that information is classified and some of it is little sensitive to discuss, but I picked two broad questions that I'd like. Maybe we can go in order of our speakers today, Adam, Terry, and then Greg. One is this question about prioritizing minerals. So is the DoD prioritizing which minerals we acquire one over the other? How do we go about doing that? And then there were other kind of broad comments about, the amount of investment being made and the amount of investment needed. So if you had any comments about what perhaps the general public, private industry, Congress, other parts of the bureaucracy, what is needed to actually give us more support in what we need to fill our critical minerals requirements. So I'll turn it over perhaps to Adam first, and then Terry, and then Greg.
Yeah, thank you, Captain Cameron, for that. Those questions, really. First of all, in terms of prioritization, we certainly do. It goes to the old adage: if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So yes, my office in particular focuses really on two key tasks. One is assessing supply chain risk for particular commodities. The other is policy. So in the course of those assessments, of course, we're determining, how many vulnerabilities, how much of a vulnerability, at the end of the day, how much risk is associated with each commodity or mineral. And then, of course, translating that into our priorities for action. And then it sort of goes from there to what we are actually able to mitigate, act upon, invest in, et cetera, and what opportunities are out there to help mitigate those risks. It also informs, of course, our interactions with the interagency. A lot of our efforts are focused, and I commend the administration and our congressional advocates for this. They've really made great strides in helping bring the community together, bring the interagency together, so that we can better leverage the unique authorities and tools that each executive branch agency has, figuring out what gaps there may be in our authorities and working with Congress to mitigate those. But basically to reduce redundancy, make sure that we're making investments or making policy in areas of mutual benefit to the not only the defense industrial base, but of course the economy writ large. So that's of critical importance. In terms of what more could be done, I think in to some degree, China is helping us with this as they limit our access to some of these materials, as they make life more challenging and raise sort of the threat of course of economic action. We see some commodity prices increase, and as that happens, it becomes more lucrative, as Greg mentioned, for companies to go into business to help mitigate some of these challenges. So in part, we sort of have it's somewhat of a benefit, although there's obviously risk associated with that in terms of timing and being able to get new capabilities and capacity online versus what we sort of lose in the near term and midterm. And then, of course, we just need continued support from Congress in funding what we need. Terry talked about the $16 billion plus essentially deficit in funding the stockpile. We need some of that fixed. So yes, there's plenty of actions to take on this front, and we look forward to continuing to work with Congress and the interagency to help fix this.
Thanks, Adam. Terry, I'd like to go to you next.
Just to add on to what Adam was saying there, when we do our economic modeling, we come up with these large billion-dollar numbers. It can seem very overwhelming. How do you go about attacking that? So in our report to Congress, and we also have briefings to Congress, we do try to narrow down what the focus of the materials are that we would stockpile. So we do share that with Congress, given various dollar amounts. And one thing that we do, just if you think about all the different, we're modeling about 167 commodities and high-tech materials. If you look at all of them, we're very aware that if you just were to sort of stockpile some, it might be that just like, we use the analogy of baking a cake, you might need eggs and flour and milk and butter. But if all you did was stockpile flour and had an emergency, you wouldn't be able to create, and the defense industrial base wouldn't be able to make the defense platforms that it desperately would need. So we do look very carefully at doing allocations too, so that what we stockpile can be used in conjunction with one another. And, we have some economic programming that helps us to look at how to, given different dollar amounts, what would be the best allocation to really be able to use those resources. So that's something that we do. And of course, as I mentioned, sharing the information to Congress as to what our priorities would be should we have funding. And then your second question was about the export bans, I think. So one of the challenges for us, and of course I'm just talking from the stockpiling perspective, is that we're really an insurance policy for the nation. So it's really hard once export bans go into place. You've kind of passed your window. You need to stockpile when conditions are sunny and good out. Once the export bans go into place, it becomes considerably more difficult for us to stockpile. We have a challenge to get the material just like any other federal, governmental or private individual entity. So it definitely becomes difficult for us to export the. So we're trying. We do try to get ahead of those, though. A lot of market research goes into trying to make decisions to try to focus on areas that could be a concern.
Excellent. Thank you, Terry. Greg, would you like the final word?
Yeah, just really briefly. I think, our efforts in this space are significant and growing, but I would argue still insufficient, given the scale and sort of cross-cutting nature of the critical minerals challenge and the degree to which it permeates every aspect of the defense industrial base and the wider civilian clean energy economy. And I think part of the challenge is we don't yet have a kind of clear sense of the denominator. What are we going to need, kind of across the board here? And in part, that's because, markets and technologies continue to kind of move underfoot. It's a little bit like chasing a car, out of your driveway right now. You sort of think you can catch up to it, but as it gets out on the main road, it starts moving faster and faster. And that's how it's been a little bit when it comes to global demand for critical minerals and clean energy technologies writ large. So that's my contribution to the kind of maybe odd analogy aspect of the program, adding to, I think, Terry's very effective cooking analogy. There's a number of lists, of course. Various parts of our own government maintain various lists of the most critical minerals. The idea that, using this construct from Jake Sullivan about, or maybe it was Secretary Gates before him, this idea of a high fence, small yard, what are the kind of crown jewels, things we really, really need for the most critical platforms. I think we're working to define that. NATO just recently came out with its own list, which I think is a step in the right direction. But we got to continue, testing that, wargaming it, analyzing it to make sure that we're focused on the inputs that really matter the most. I think the reality is, at least over the near term here, we're not going to be able to completely replace or decouple from the Chinese kind of processing supply chains here. But I think what we can do is work together with allies and partners to kind of make ourselves collectively something akin to a swing producer in the hydrocarbon markets, where we won't be able to sort of wholesale replace the whole supply, but we can function in a way that avoids the PRC's ability to manipulate prices and use its position in the market to coercive effect and strategic advantage. And I think from a defense perspective, that's really where the mission has to go moving forward. So that's all for me.
Excellent. Great way to wrap us up there, Greg. I'd like to thank, on behalf of the Naval War College, all of our speakers today, Adam Burstein, Teresa Leland, and Greg Pollock. This was a wonderful panel featuring all the many ways that critical minerals are approached within the Department of Defense and identifying a lot of different needs for future mission accomplishment within the DoD. I invite all of my panelists to turn your cameras off, and I'll provide my concluding remarks. Overall, I'd like to thank everyone. It's truly been a rich learning environment, getting a lot of positive feedback. And I'll just say, even before the event, a lot of people had a lot of big ideas of what this event could be. So it might be the first of many as we dive further into this important topic of what the DoD needs in response to fulfilling our mission with critical minerals requirements. I'd like to thank everyone, particularly Professor Peter Dombrowski, the William B. Ruger Chair for National Security Economics, as well as the Naval War College Foundation. By being virtual, we are able to bring together all of these experts from across the force, and we also are able to record the event for many people to access it in the future. We had over 160 people online today. However, I know that sometimes viewings of our events go into the thousands afterwards because of the positive reception we get and the important information sharing that happens during this. I'd like to thank my team back at the Naval War College, a special events team of Karen, Michon, and especially Charla, who's been behind the scenes. Our technical support from Dean and Mark, our PAO, media services, alumni programs, the climate and human security team, and especially Dr. Michael Bush. While I was on camera, it took all of these people working hard today to deliver this event to you, and I couldn't have done it without them. Thank you all for joining us today. Stay safe, everyone. This concludes our virtual conference on critical minerals and national security. Thank you for joining us.